Welcome to the OC24 podcast, where we've taken some of the best talks and discussions from this year's 24-hour conference on global organised crime, which showcases some of the most interesting research into organised crime around the world. This episode is called Organised Crime, Human Trafficking, Contraband and Repression.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. My name is Liu Lin. I am the director of Institute for Asian Crime and Security, and welcome to joining in the panel titled Organized Crime, Human Trafficking, Contraband, and Repression. And joining me, we have four speakers, including me as the panelists, and I will be chairing for this panel at the same time. All right, since we're on time, I will give a little bit introduction about our panel, and then we will enter into the individual presentations. And at the end of the presentations, we will open floor for Q&A, and then that will be end of this, the panel. So without further ado, I will do the introduction of this panel. So this panel, we will talk about various issues regarding human trafficking, drug trafficking, contraband, and repression, as mentioned in the title. And Mathew Charles will present the findings of the study that explores organized crime and youth involvement in Colombia's northern Cauca region. And me, I will then discuss and present the findings of the comparative study that examines the trafficking of women and girls in Southeast Asia through a human security perspective. And Maria Zuppello, I'm hoping that I pronounced your name correctly.
Perfect.
Great, thank you. We'll discuss a recent study that sheds light on Latin America's underrecognized crime-terror nexus by explaining how criminal and terrorist actors are using innovative methods to evade detection, smuggle drugs, and use the proceeds to fund Islamic extremism through halal meat certification in Brazil. And our last but not the least speaker is Taciana Santos de Souza. She will discuss the outcome of a study which analyzed 170 cases of drug trafficking in São Paulo, Brazil, and found that drug repression policies actually favor organized crime. So I believe that all the audiences are very looking forward to our four presentations. And let me introduce our first panelist, Mathew Charles. Dr. Mathew, he's a social and creative ethnographer with a specific interest in organized crime and cultural criminology. His work focuses mainly on the recruitment and participation of youth in criminal activity, particularly in Latin America, as well in armed conflict. So Mathew, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, please unmute yourself and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, so I'm gonna jump straight into it. 10 minutes is not a lot of time to go into detail. So my presentation is called Colombia's Community, City and Country Lines and the Part-Time Child Traffickers who run them. I just wanted first to explain a little bit about the context. So the study was in the southwestern region of Cauca in Colombia, and in four kind of towns or municipalities, specifically Miranda, Corinto, Torrevillo, and Jambalo. This area is known for its marijuana cultivation. It's one of the biggest areas in Colombia where marijuana is grown. And this area specifically is an indigenous reservation. It belongs to the Nasa people, so it's kind of a semi-autonomous zone. But it is controlled by dissident factions of the FARC guerrilla, as well as other groups who occasionally try to make incursions into the region. this picture that you can see, locals call this kind of area of 4 towns, they call it Manhattan. And that's because of these lights that you see. I mean, this really is the middle of nowhere. So at night time, it really should be dark, but it's not. These lights kind of light up the rural skyline. And these lights that you see are all marijuana plantations. They're all marijuana cultivations. And so it's known as Manhattan, or Little Manhattan, by the people that live there. But as I say, this is a place that really is controlled by dissident factions of the FARC. The number of hectares of marijuana crops has increased, is increasing, has been increasing since the peace process of 2016. This is an area with more than 6,000 farmers growing marijuana and 70% of the population living off it. They grow a particular brand of marijuana, a particular breed, if you like, called creepy, which is particularly potent. But this area is also one of Colombia's poorest. So this is not just a bunch of criminals doing it because that they can and because they want to. For these farmers, for these families, this is about livelihood. It's about survival. So it's important to recognize that for children growing up in this region, marijuana cultivation and trafficking has been normalized. It's kind of part of the routine. So crime is not only a source of income for their families, but it also represents the real opportunity for them. And criminal groups, rather than kind of being oppressive or vehicles for oppression, become opportunities to escape that kind of poverty and inequality. Joining an armed group or working in marijuana becomes a life choice. And alternative imaginaries that we might see in other areas just are not seen as realistic or attainable by young people living in this community, which creates kind of negative identities and even feelings of low self-efficacy. So that gives you a kind of brief overview of the context of where the study took place. I'm not going to talk much about the method. I could, but I think that would be a whole different presentation. The method that we used was creative ethnography, life writing in particular. So it was a participatory project. 25 young people between the ages of 9 and 18 wrote stories about their lives over the course of 3 months in 10 workshops. But I think that, there's probably 2 things I want to say about the method, about creative ethnography in particular. Participatory projects, really, it's about the generation of knowledge rather than the extraction. And also, I think the other point to make is that for us as researchers, the whole point was to kind of achieve a deeper understanding of what drives youth offending in these in these contexts of protracted violence. But simultaneously, this type of participatory project allowed the young participants to explore their own lives and to reflect on their own lives and their own decisions as well. Because at the end of the day, participatory projects are based in social research and are all about trying to inspire and provoke some kind of change. So this is the kind of trafficking structure that we uncovered together. In Spanish, it's referred to as microtráfico, it's basically domestic trafficking. So this is the kind of sale of marijuana in the local community. These are not the kind of massive cocaine trafficking rings that we see to Mexico and the United States and further afield. This is about selling drugs in the local community. And this is something that's increased massively in Colombia since 2016 because resurgent armed groups trying to reassert themselves within kind of Colombia's post-conflict or within Colombia's peace process need access to cash quickly. And this is quite a lucrative way of doing that. So what we saw is that from marijuana plantations, young children and young people move the drugs to the plazas. The plazas there's a head of a plaza. There may be drug cooks where they make the marijuana cigarettes. Sometimes it's mixed with cocaine as well and sold as what they call bazuco here. And then there are dealers, and each dealer, these are all children and young people, are responsible for moving and selling those drugs to particular, what they call mini plazas, which will be individual bars, schools, maybe particular villages or neighborhoods, because this is really a rural community. And then others will be responsible for moving the drugs to kind of major transportation points so the drugs can move out further afield through Colombia. And within that, then we identified 3 levels of route. And this really is kind of based in the UK experience of county lines, where vulnerable youths are used by organized criminal structures in the bigger cities in the UK to move drugs out to the smaller coastal towns. And we identified then three levels. So first of all, the kind of community route. So there were young people working within their towns, within their villages, or sometimes between them, moving and selling drugs. Then they would move up to the bigger cities nearby, having to travel there on bus, and then even further afield to really entry points to the international trafficking market. So, these bus routes are quite long, maybe 6, 7, 8 hours. And they will leave the drugs there, and it would then be the responsibility of someone else to move them down the rivers in the case of getting to Venezuela or Brazil, and then road transportation through Ecuador down to Chile and Argentina. Some of the young people in the study had been to Brazil, but mostly they get to the cities, they leave the drugs at these kind of entry points, and they're shipped by other people along the international lines. And this is progressive. So the young people, when they start out, will work in the community, and as they gain more trust, more experience, they'll move up to the other levels. What were some of the stories? This list on here is in no way exhaustive. These are just some of the key themes. There wasn't really a universal experience, let's say, but there were definitely some common themes, and the vast majority, if not all of them, do this part-time. These are young people that still go to school, still study. Most of them do quite well at school. And I think this changes our notion of vulnerability, because these are not the kind of vulnerable young kids that we might normally expect to become involved in trafficking routes. They also were very clear that this was, their decision. It was about their future. It was about guaranteeing security for themselves. This was not something that they said they were forced to do, at least by an individual or by a group of individuals, but they may have been forced to do it by the kind of socioeconomic circumstances in which they live. Obviously, many had family ties. We saw at the beginning, 70% of the local economy kind of work in this industry. So those with family ties found it much easier to move in. There were also opportunities for leadership. One of the things that we found out was how armed groups will kind of recruit young kind of leaders, the brightest, and not necessarily the most vulnerable, but the brightest, those that can galvanize a following and that can be trusted to run a small group. I mean, some of these classes are being run by 14, 15-year-olds who has a small army of, 10 and 11-year-olds. And there was definitely, they saw it as a trajectory. They saw the chance to progress up the criminal ladder, if you like. But they didn't see it as something they wanted to stay within, which I think is quite interesting. Many of them saw this as an opportunity to save money to be able to go to university, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to study because they don't have the resources. So I think that's another interesting factor that is not necessarily one that we've seen before when we think about young people and drug trafficking. And there were definitely gendered experiences. So girls tended to be more exploited, certainly sexually exploited. They would be befriended by older boys who would ask them to move products from A to B, and then girls would be used to seduce other boys and bring them into the network as well. So what are the implications of this? Well, I think there's an opportunity to learn from this kind of global South experience of youth and youth on the margins. We have to recognize that there isn't a universal childhood, a notion of childhood or youth experience, but instead multiple youths. And also, I think it's important to say that this is not just exploitation, how it might be represented sometimes in the UK, for example, or certainly in the global north. It is progressively exploitative, but I think that's different, and that's something that maybe we can talk about later. But to dismiss this as simple exploitation in my view, is to deny the structural context in which these crimes are committed. We have to recognize the agency of these young people, and perhaps therefore it then redefines our understanding of vulnerability as a more active concept. in which young traffickers are not perceived as victims nor as dangerous criminals, but kind of somewhere in between, doing the best that they can to survive in the circumstances that they are living in. So it recasts criminality not as a rational choice, if you like, but as a means to escape the precarity which defines their experience of youth on the margins of Colombia. Anthropologist Henrik Vai describes the process of social navigation, which is roughly the kind of relationship between ourselves and the environment, and how all of that interacts. And he would say that these young people are trying to escape the defining social structures in which they find themselves in order to gain viable life choices. So in contexts of protracted violence and criminal governance, which these young people are living in, this navigation becomes a navigation of crime generative influences, because that is what they are surrounded by. The social bonds which normally anchor us conventional society are replaced by loose criminal alternatives, which conversely pull the young person deeper into the norms and practices of the underworld. So it's important to differentiate then between capacity and capability, because if we think that the former refers to the kind of internal arsenal that we have to understand our surroundings, and the capability is the means of achieving that change that we may seek, then these young people do understand their world and they are taking options to improve the situation, but they lack the capability, they lack the resources to really do anything effective. And so the only option that they have, or that they perceive that they have, is to succumb to the opportunities provided in the underworld. So if their aim is to escape the dominant social structures in some kind of weird paradox, they end up actually becoming part of them. And I think that is my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your wonderful, insightful presentation and the case study of Cauca, Colombia. And I definitely see that it is increasing risks and vulnerability for the youth and kids in the area. And I think you addressed a number of key points, including the lines and social navigation and the stories of those kids. Well, thank you for your sharing. And I guess I am up the next one to present. So let me share my screen. So for my presentation, the paper is titled "Human Trafficking in Southeast Asia: A Comparative Case Study from a Feminist Human Security Perspective." And what this is, I think this might be a little bit theoretical, but let's see how it goes. And then it is a preliminary study, so I'm still doing the research. So I will share with you my findings so far. This is the outline. I will do introduction, followed by literature review and research question, cases, methods, results and findings, and policy implications, and a conclusion. For the introduction, human trafficking is nothing new, and there are long time battle between government and human traffickers across the Southeast Asia region, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are source and destination countries in Southeast Asia. For example, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Indonesia are considered as major source countries for human trafficking. Destination countries include Malaysia, Thailand. Victims from Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, for example, were trafficked to Thailand. And Malaysia also has been a destination for Indonesia and Vietnam. What the bottom line here is, maybe it's a little bit complicated about the routes, but human trafficking in the region has been and probably will continue to be a critical human security issue in the future. So this is the map for you to get sense. A little bit literature review. I don't want to spend too much time here because we only have 10 minutes, but the literature says that human security is a theoretical perspective. Many regional and international organizations have recognized the concept and implemented and stressed the the importance of human security. However, there's no real consensus so far that what can or should constitute the focus of human security studies. Essentially, human security is a people-centered model aiming to address security at individual level, and the family's perspective is important in human security because women and children are often victims of violence and crime, which is understandable. And various scholars have argued that women and children suffer from unequal access to resources, services, and opportunity, not only in the region of Southeast Asia, but other places as well. Mathew talk about global South, and then I think that's the similar situation out there as well. And the human trafficking issue in Southeast Asia has three general features. The first is cross-border. Many of the victims from those countries were trafficked to neighboring countries, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. The second is complex. The TIP report, the Trafficking Persons Report, also pointed out that human trafficking is still a massive problem in the region, which connects with different types of crime. And the third feature is underreported rate of cases. And I did a prior research resulting that human trafficking has been underreported, underdetected, and underprosecuted. And the crimes remain hidden, and the fear of intimidation oppress the victims. For my research question in this paper is, what are the general conditions and individual conditions of human trafficking patterns in Southeast Asia? I tried to identify the general conditions and individual conditions and compare and contrast the findings. The same map again, and this time it shows the case studies, the cases that I selected. So there are 4 cases: Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, and Vietnam. These 4 countries were selected because those 4 countries are considered source countries for human trafficking in the region. And this table is just to give you a sense about the number of victims versus its population in each country. Methods, I think I'll be doing just like Mathew. I will just do it very quickly to skip it, or not skip it, but just introduce it very quickly. So this is a qualitative comparative case studies to analyze differences between 2 or more groups on the dependent variables. And the data were collected, basically secondary sources analysis, because of my goal is to compare and contrast the differences between the general conditions and individual conditions that I identified from the research. So the data were collected from government reports, the TIP reports, newspapers, and NGO reports, etc. And in this research, I adopted indicators provided by the human security concept, emphasizing gender. I used 2-level indicators, as I mentioned, general and individual conditions. The general conditions here is defined as the common patterns that can be observed from the case studies. And individual conditions here in this paper is defined as the individual observable patterns that are different from other cases. In total, so far I used 12 country profile documents as pieces of evidence, and then I coded the documents using software, computer assistant software, and to analyze the codes. And for the codings, including sex trafficking, forced labor, and for the gender indicators, include men, male, boys, woman, female, and girls. But in total, there are 797 codes were generated from the documents for analysis. And it shows the coded document portrait, just for you to get a sense. about the proportion of the codes and where it goes. And the second figure shows the map, the relationship between different indicators. Results and findings. Well, for general conditions, the result shows that between 2018 and 2020, sex trafficking and female-related trafficking have more counts than forced labor and male-related trafficking issues. It indicates that female-related sex trafficking is the major issue in Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, and Vietnam, which is not surprising. And the results also indicate that female-related terms, women, female, and girls, have a stronger connection with both sex trafficking and forced labor. So this is the result. It's there are three figures here. We're showing two. So here is the result for sex trafficking and forced labor. And the figure 4, it's about female-related terms in general. So you can see the different trends that we can observe from the analysis. So in general, in individual conditions, the results show that there's an increase in both sex trafficking and forced labor in the case of Cambodia, and no major increase was observed in sex trafficking for Indonesia. There's no major increase in sex trafficking for Laos, and major decrease was observed in forced labor. For Vietnam, no major increase or decrease were observed in sex trafficking and forced labor. And also the patterns of using female-related terms and to capture the development of each case. The result shows that there's an increase from 2018 to 2020 in the case of Cambodia, and for Indonesia, an increase was observed from 2018 and 2020. For Laos, a dramatic decrease in female-related terms, and finally, for Vietnam, no major changes were observed. Some discussions based on the findings. First, in general, female-related trafficking issues are the primary concern in the 4 cases, and female-related sex trafficking is a particular concern, especially for Cambodia and Laos, where an increase in the use of the terms were observed. And third, female-related forced labor is an important issue, especially for Cambodia and Indonesia. Another development that we can observe in the case of Laos is that there was a sudden decrease in both in the use of the term forced labor and the female-related terms. What it suggests that in Laos, female-related forced labor has become a less significant issue than if compared to sex trafficking. And finally, compared to the use of female-related terms in all 4 cases, there was an increase in using those terms in Cambodia and Indonesia, whereas a general decrease was observed in Laos. Well, it sounds a little bit overwhelming, but this result indicates no common trend or development in female-related trafficking issues were identified among the 4 cases. That means they have, at the individual level, they are very different. And also there's a gap between the general conditions and individual conditions. Well, the general conditions shows that sex trafficking is most prominent issue if compared with the forced labor. However, it did not necessarily capture the development of the individual case. For example, in Cambodia and Indonesia, female-related forced labor is also a critical issue that has increased its importance over the years. However, the development cannot be observed in the general condition. So implications that for each case, for Cambodia, the trafficking of women and girls is getting worse, and many of the trafficking women occur in entertainment establishment and However, the Cambodia government did not put enough effort into addressing the issue. In Indonesia, the policy implication is that the trafficking of women and girls for forced labor has become a more important issue over the past years, and traffickers commonly use fraud and coercion during trafficking. However, there was a lack of efficient identification measure for victims. In Laos, many female workers have faced the risk of becoming human trafficking victims because the Laos government imposed the ban for workers who do not possess enough professional skills. And finally, for Vietnam, female trafficking was involved with its labor market. Most labor firms are affiliated with state-owned enterprises, and female workers seeking overseas jobs were recruited by illegal brokers who charged either higher fee, making victims face higher risk and of debt-based coercion for forced labor, sex trafficking. So here, I think Mathew also talked about that in his presentation. The risk factors are important concern in this case as well. In conclusion, the general conditions of the 4 countries, the result shows that sex trafficking against female victims is the major issue. And in individual conditions, each case has its unique patterns. Overall, despite that female-related trafficking is the major concern, there was no major trend in female-related trafficking issues among the 4 cases. So the bottom line is the result of this study implied that generalization of female-related human trafficking in Southeast Asia would cause a blind spot and misleading information with a potential risk about the actual situation that each country is faced with. Therefore, as a researcher and policymaker, we should be prudent and careful when looking at the big picture of human trafficking in women, girls, and overall in the region. And should pay more attention to the state level situation and investigate the individual country's development rather than making a general assumption, analysis, and conclusion at the regional level. All right, our next speaker is Maria, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Maria Zuppello is an investigative reporter and an expert on crime terror nexus in Latin America. Also a TV producer and video journalist, spent over 20 years of experience. Very impressive background and experience. So I'm very looking forward to your presentation. I believe that all the audience is also looking forward to your point of view. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, I think that everyone. Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you live. I'm going to speak tonight about halal meat certification as a new way to smuggle drugs and fund terrorism, with a specific focus on Brazil. First of all, I want to highlight that this talk has absolutely nothing against the halal industry. On the contrary, halal professionals can be better understand what kind of weaknesses in the halal chain the bad actors can exploit. So let's start with my research that you can find partially in my book, The Crime Terror Nexus in Latin America, Tropical Jihad. What exactly does the word halal mean? It means lawful and permitted. We have the same ideas in other religions, such as Judaism, where they have the word kosher. And halal always comes with its opposite, haram. Just a few comments about the halal certification. Halal certification usually applies to meat and hundreds of other non-food products, and we can define a halal product when it's formulated and produced with ingredients and tools that are accepted under Islamic law. What is very important to outline is that all halal certification bodies basically examine all the halal food production, from the slaughtering in case of meat until to the final part, which is transportation, distribution, and cargo placement. It's very important for the story that I'm going to report right now. The global market value of halal certification is huge because Muslims account for 1.9 billion of the world's customers, and they're really growing. And halal certification is recognized worldwide in over 150 countries as a market worth over 3 trillion per year. So it's really a huge market. Why Brazil? Why Brazil is so important? Because Brazil is the world's largest supplier of halal food, particularly beef. Brazil is also the world's largest meat exporter. But Brazil, as Latin America's largest Muslim community, which is estimated to be between 400,000 and 800,000 Muslims. However, Brazil is one of the world's largest cocaine exporter, not a producer. Just to give you an idea, only in 2019, a Brazilian authority seized more than 100 tons of cocaine. And also, for years, Brazil has served as a crossroad for Islamic terrorist financing, usually via drug trafficking and money laundering. We have investigation about Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and also ISIS. And because in Brazil, we have a unique phenomenon. There are Islamic terrorists who later joined organized crime group, like PCC, for example, in jail. This is the case of this guy, Fernando Cabral, aka Matt Faiz, who was arrested in the hashtag operation in Brazil in 2016. Why does the halal market have the potential to attract terrorists and criminals? What are its weaknesses? First of all, the reduced detection risk, because frozen meat hides very well the smell of cocaine. For the scanners, it's very hard, it's very difficult to find cocaine below the texture of meat. Also because it's very easy to produce fake invoices. Don't forget that religious organizations in Brazil don't pay taxes. And usually all the certification body, they are just 4, correspond, that are located in the same buildings that the religious organization. And most of the time, the people that work for the religious organizations also work for the certification body. And also because we have a huge risk of labor exploitation of Muslim migrants. Brazil is not a Muslim country, so it needs to import migrants. There is a big migration of Muslim migrants, but there are a lot of foreign migrants working that already filed a lot of lawsuits for the bad conditions of work in the Brazilian plants. We have an iconic case that really sum up all the problems that come with the halal certification. This is called the Algeria's cocaine gate. This guy is the Algerian Pablo Escobar, Kamel Shiki, aka El Bouchi. Algerian authorities arrested him, his brothers, and many business associates a week after seizing at the port of Oran 701 kilos of cocaine in May 2018. What is interesting in this story is that the drugs, cocaine, were concealed in red boxes labeled halal beef. And here, not here, in the next slide, what is important to highlight is that since 2007, Kamel Shiki had an exclusive contract to import Minerva Foods halal meat into Algeria. Minerva Foods is a Brazilian company. But in 2015, the state-owned Saudi Agricultural and Livestock Investment, SALIC, bought approximately 20% stake. And today we are around 35 Minerva Foods also operates in Colombia and Paraguay. This cargo full of loaded with cocaine left Santos in Brazil on April 27, just stopped at Las Palmas in the Canary Islands, and then went to Spain, Valencia. Here, the Spanish authorities discovered the cocaine and decided to reship the cocaine on the Mega Mercury, another ship, to see the final destination, which was Oran in Algeria. Why this seizure is interesting? First of all, for the localization. This coastline between Casablanca and Algiers is called now Golden Arch for drug traffickers. Why? Not only because it's for its proximity to Europe, which is a very lucrative market, but also because the Sahel region is becoming more dangerous because of the terrorism, the terrorist threats. This is the seizures, as you can see, the boxes, the red boxes with Minerva Foods. Part of the drug was intended for the lucrative Saudi Arabia market, while another part was intended for the European market. This part should be transferred by the Italian 'Ndrangheta with the possible assistance of the Camorra. 'Ndrangheta is very powerful everywhere, also in Algeria. We have an operation called Criterion 2 in 2016. The Italian authorities arrested 16 people, and the big boss, mobster was Nicolino Granderati. This guy was able to invest more than 2,000 million euros in real estate and to get a bank guarantees of 5 million euros. So you can imagine the scope of a story. According to the Spanish newspaper ABC, Algerian religious authority, before the seizure, were dissatisfied with the type of meat cut imported by Camel Shiki. And remember, was hired to certify that this export have received the halal cut type of meat quickly, which, according to investigators, implies that there were accomplices in the halal certified authorities in Brazil that didn't control the quality of meat that Minerva Food was exporting. Why Camel Shiki was involved in this big scheme? He's a powerful man. He made a fortune on real estate, but with this money, he funded a lot of mosques, over 200 just in his hometown Lakdaria, and a lot of Quranic schools. And if you're gonna dig inside his story, his family story, it's amazing, because one of his cousins, Omar, was in the Islamic Salvation Front leadership in Lakdaria, and he was also one of the founding members of the armed Islamic group GIA. Camel's old brother, who is now in custody, arrested with him, has ties to the GIA, and the family butcher shop in 1994 was closed by Algerian gendarmerie because they suspected that its owner were supplying the GIA. As you know, the GIA, it's apparently over, but actually, for example, these days we have a trial of 13 November, the leadership of the attacker was operating from Syria, and we had two people, actually former GIA terrorists. So it's a very important group, a terrorist group. We already have evidence that 'Ndrangheta is collaborating with Islamic group. The Italian Operation Stammer in 2017 uncovered a guy, a Lebanese guy living based in Italy, that collected money for 'Ndrangheta families for paying Colombian sellers, and then provided services of money laundering in Lebanon for the same family, 'Ndrangheta families. Let's go back to the 2018, the same year than Camel Shiki seizure. We are in Santos, the same port. This time, 2 months later, police seized 448 kilos of cocaine. Final destination was China. The stopover was in Europe. What is interesting that the drug was concealed in carton box with halal meat certified by the FAMBRAS, Federation of Muslim Associations of Brazil. Okay, here we have some pictures. Here you can see the seal, here the meat. Here, this is the number that the criminal put to signalize. Here, this is the brick of cocaine. Okay, good. FAMBRAS halal and FAMBRAS are more or less the same thing. And we have a guy that has been flagged by US authorities. This guy is Sheikh Khaled Takeldin or Khaled Razek Takeldin. He was a Dava theological director of FAMBRAS and is currently working for FAMBRAS halal. Why this guy is significant? We have the testimony, the congressional testimony of Roger Noriega, who is the former US Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, who declared that in 1995, Takeldin hosted Osama bin Laden and 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed at the Tripoli border. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, according to Roger Noriega, is one of Moshe Rabbani principal collaborators in the America, linked to members of a Treasury Department designated tri-border network that provide financial and logistical support to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this guy is currently working for this certification body. But it's not the only one that has been flagged by international investigation. Here you can see a Shia cleric, Taleb Hossein Al-Khazrai. He's the owner of the Alimentos Halal Brazil, which is the halal certification branch of the Arrazala Islamic Center. According to the Argentinian prosecutor Alberto Nisman, Al-Khazrai is a prominent Iranian operative that was linked to high officials in Iran that worked as co-conspirators of the army attack in Argentina in 1994. But we also have, working for the same center that Karzai, another guy, Bilal Mosen-Webb, is a US designated chief representative of Hezbollah in South America. He is a fundraiser for Hezbollah, and he also worked and overseen Hezbollah's counterintelligence activity in the tri-border area. In this picture, we can see him.
Maria, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So I'm controlling the time as well. So we're passing like 13 minutes.
Yes, I finished.
Yes.
I finished.
Okay, great. Well, just a reminder.
Yeah.
Right,
I have my watch. It's here with the grandson of former Ayatollah Khomeini. And also in the 90s, 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed went to Brazil to set up an import-export business of frozen halal chicken, because it was the Al-Qaeda way to move operatives and launder money. To sum up, what kind of recommendations or countermeasures? First of all, we need to increase the exchange of financial information between Brazil and Europe and Brazil and the United States. We have some institutions like Eurojust that can work better. Second, we need to improve the issue of scanners. In Brazil, the scanners in the ports are managed by private companies, which means that these companies are at a risk to be infiltrated by bad actors. And finally, we need, this is a recommendation for the halal professionals, to better unificate the halal chain. It means that we need more control in the last part of the process, which is the cargo placement and the distribution. Thank you so much. I want just to give you my data. This is my mail, mariazuppello@gmail.com, and you can follow me on Twitter. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Maria, for your presentation on halal market and the drug trafficking across the border. And in the interest of time, because we want to save time for Q&A, the next speaker is Taciana Santos de Souza. She's an economist graduated from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. And Taciana, are you ready. If you're okay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity and organization of the Global Initiative. It is a rich and important moment because, as we know, it's very difficult to research about organized crime. It is a subject of difficult access to information and, above all, scarce data. My name is Taciana Santos de Souza. I have a PhD in economics. My field is drug economics. I've been studying this topic for 11 years. I took my master's and PhD at the Economics Institute at University of Campinas, which is a slightly different school of economic thought because they teach and promote research from the heterodox economic approach. So I was able to benefit from more realistic methodologies and analyses that were less based on the classic economic models. So during my master's, I analyzed the demand and supplies of this illicit economy. I observed many economic similarities between transnational crime organizations and formal companies. In addition, I highlighted some aspects commonly noted in organized crime, such as the importance of innovation, creativity, flexibility, and adaptation of these economic agents. I emphasized those aspects because they were crucial for the study that I did in sequence for my PhD. In my dissertation, I specifically researched the impact of policies to repress drug trafficking in the state of São Paulo, the Brazilian region with the highest absolute number of people in prison. That is what I'm going to talk about today. I conducted a survey and collected data. The database comprised 107 court sentences of drug trafficking convictions in the state of São Paulo in 2019. My initial focus was not specifically evaluating organized crime. My goal was to contribute with information about the economic aspects that encompassed the illegal drug economy. Therefore, I studied the repression action of public institutions, the flow of illicit goods, and the actions of illegal agents. I verified many information and results by researching court sentence, but I will explain some of them. 86% of the defendants were men. 82% of the defendants had a maximum of 100 reais or less than $18. Only 3.4% carried firearms. 2.1% committed other crimes. There were no cases murder or other violent crimes associated with the crime of drug trafficking. These initial data indicate 2 points. First, most of the convicted individuals worked with illegal drug trafficking in São Paulo do not match the profile of the popular imagination of the typical drug dealer. Second, the role of drug traffickers in São Paulo may imply a different, less violent dynamic. In fact, as we will see below, both points are confirmed in the study. I also highlighted another fact. 50.6% of the people incarcerated were first-time offenders and 49.4% of people jailed were persistent offenders. From the group of the first-time offenders, only 3.4% were related to organized crime. On the other hand, from the group of persistent offenders, 15.5% were related to organized crime. The only criminal group mentioned in the trials was the first command of the capital, PCC, or PCC. The first command of the capital is a hegemonic criminal organization in the state of São Paulo. It emerged as a prison faction inside prisons in the 90s. Currently, they were the only drug suppliers in the state of São Paulo. The PCC disputes other markets for Brazil and other countries, especially Paraguay. There are members of the group in different parts of the world, and they have transnational characteristic organizations. The group primarily sells natural and semi-synthetic drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, and crack. The PCC is also active in other types of crime, such as cargo theft. There are several legal and illegal business performed by the members of the group. Regarding the illegal drug market, PCC is the main supplier to the wholesale market. The PCC regulates the retail market, keeping prices low and directing the dealers' work. This implies a different dynamic of drug trafficking when compared to other regions in Brazil. The production chain is diffuse. There is a manager, there are several couriers, there are several resales, there are people who work in accounting, there are people who only stock the products. In São Paulo, a drug selling point is not common. That is why the policy has difficulty to repress this market. When the police arrests a person from that sector, the activity continues for the others. Furthermore, drug prices remain very low, almost decreasing if we consider Brazilian inflation. This reduces the attraction of competitors. Still, the criminal organization makes big profits because they employ many people. In this sense, the mass arrest of people works as a kind of recruitment of more workers to the criminal group. First, because they command the prisons in São Paulo, set the rules and discipline criminals. Second, because the group maintains a business structure. They rotate positions and workers, they promote good employees, provide career paths, they provide financial resources to the family of members who are imprisoned. In addition, they offer other benefits, such as lawyers and other types of supports. This makes joining the group very attractive to young traffickers. In addition to security, there is a social status and prestige of the group in the poor neighborhoods. This is because they organize a series of local conflicts through the work of the discipliner, someone who is responsible for dealing with local issues and avoiding the police. It had a very intense impact on the drop in homicides in São Paulo. They say that is for peace that the command makes war. At the same time that part of the population respects and benefits from the peace promoted by the PCC, another part of the population is frightened by the expansion and growth of organized crime. This generates political impacts not only in São Paulo, but throughout Brazil. One much observed is the growth of penal populism. With that, violent solutions, speech that banalize and violate human rights and are supported by unscientific justifications that promote punitiveness, gain strength in the country. On the other hand, a series of economic aspects linked to underdevelopment remain hidden. I highlight the increase in unemployment, especially among poor youth, and economic inequality as the main problems in São Paulo and in Brazil as a whole. The informality of the labor market and the change in the most recent labor legislation, which made the rules more flexible and intensified the exploitation of workers, is another problem that should be highlighted. These issues reveal the Brazilian economic context. In my study, it was very clear that drug prohibition policies and the repression of the work of traffickers is very targeted at poor populations. This punitive work does not happen in isolation.
To interrupt. So this is Leo, the moderator. Please, if you can, yes. Yes, so please wrap up in the next 1 to 2 minutes. So we will have some time for Q&A. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. It takes place in a context where organized crime manages prisons and resolves conflicts better than the state does. Therefore, part of the success of organized crime is due to good management. Another part, their success is due to socioeconomic issues. So I point out here some considerations that do not sound so obvious in the fight against organized crime. First, criminal organizations succeed in their own business because they have innovative and creative skills and capabilities. Second, criminal organizations do not operate out of the context. The environment and the economic, social, and political context reveal a lot about the research that are made available to crime. In this sense, I reinforce the importance of reviewing the war on drugs policy as a way of reducing financial income to these criminal agents, as well as promoting socioeconomic development. In some cases, opting to join a criminal organization may be an individual's choice. In other, it may be the only option. Therefore, governments cannot only direct efforts to fight organized crime, they must strive to promote social justice and citizenship so that the lawful and formal life is more attractive than criminal activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taciana, for your wonderful presentation on the case study based on the 170 core sentences. Well, that is a lot of analysis that you're doing. All right, we have roughly 11 minutes for Q&A, and so far I do not see any questions coming in. I have some questions, so I will just go ahead and ask. And in the meantime, well, the audience, well, everyone, well, just feel free to send in any questions that you would like to ask. So first of all, for Mathew, thank you very much for your presentation again. And you talked about the drug trafficking marijuana issue in Cauca, Colombia, and the youth life is quite entering into risks and to be vulnerable in this sense. So I was wondering, because for younger people, they use a lot of like social media, like cell phones to communicate. So what do you see from this end? So the drug trafficking, the stories between the drug trafficking, the cases that you see, and the stories of those youths in terms of like using social media and any online platforms. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, social media is not, in this particular region, is not a major pastime, let's say. Such high levels of poverty, it's very uncommon for the young people involved in the study to have access to mobile phones or to have social media accounts. But I think, coming back to the idea of risk that you mentioned at the beginning as well, I think the whole point, or one of the objectives of the study really, or one that kind of emerged anyway, was the image of risk, the idea that we have of children at risk is very different. And this is something as well that emerged talking to youth workers and teachers and community leaders. If they get out their list of risk factors for children that become involved in youth, it's children that have families issues at home, children that perhaps don't attend school, children that don't perform well at school. But that profile has kind of changed in this context anyway, because these were all young people that do attend school. They perform quite well at school. They want to perform well at school. They are dedicated to their studies. And I think one of the most interesting things was that this kind of part-time work in drug trafficking was to fund further study. They want to go to university, but they understand that because of the socioeconomic circumstances that they live in, that likelihood is it's not very realistic because of the situation they're in, and so they're looking for options to improve their chances, and criminality is seen as one of those possible solutions. So I think that's why I talk about agency, because these are young people that have a foot in the underworld, if you like, and as well as a foot in the upper world. But the danger is, obviously, as we know, that their involvement in the kind of criminal life in the criminal underworld becomes more and more exploitative, and they get pulled more and more, or get pulled further and further in. And I'm not sure that was always something that was something they were aware of.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mathew, for your answers to my question. And well, definitely, I also see the increasing risks for those young people in Cauca, Colombia. I was not aware the poverty issue is at a very high serious level there. So thank you for providing this new knowledge to me. My next question goes to Maria, and you mentioned about the weaknesses in the halal market which attract tourists. So how about the law enforcement effort in combating the halal market in Brazil?
The effort is huge. The problem is that the country is huge. It's 3 times bigger than Europe, so and Brazil became a big hub for smuggling cocaine to Europe. So it's really hard to stop this flow of drugs leaving the country. The other problem is that since we are talking about religious certifications, they don't belong to the official documents that meat exporters need to present to the health authorities. So, for example, it's very hard to find records of the halal certification body that certify that kind of that specific cargo of meat. So I feel that we are at the beginning. We also need, and this is a problem not only from Brazil, but everywhere, of a better education of law enforcement, because we have organized crime experts and we have terrorist experts. Actually, we are in a moment of history where drug and terrorism, crime and terrorism are matching very well and are taking advantage one of the other. So we need a different expertise, more larger than the expertise that we have today. So that's I have a question, if I can, to Mathew, because I went to Colombia to cover the peace talk. And as you know, unfortunately, Colombia is infamous for the child soldiers. Okay, so my question is how this heavy legacy, which is also a ethic legacy, interfere in the people that you researched, in the story that you researched, and the children that you focused on?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question because the recruitment or the forced recruitment of children and young people is something that has been rising ever since the peace accords of 2016, and is increasing year on year, according to the figures. And one of the areas with the highest numbers is where we were working as well, and that's why these young people separated themselves from that. They said, we are not child soldiers. What we are doing is, we're working in an economy that is basically the economy that our local community survives on. We're not joining a rebel armed group. We're just moving something around, and we're doing it because of survival. We don't have guns. We don't have an ideological cause. We're not doing it because we believe in something. We're doing it because this is basically the only source of employment that we have to try and make a future for ourselves. But I think that was important because for them, it was important for them to separate that from the kind of legacy of child soldiering that is still very, very much of the, very much part of life in Colombia, but in that, specifically in that zone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we now have 2 minutes left. And I think it's time for me to conclude our panel. I would like to thank you again, all the panelists, for your participation and for your presentations. I truly enjoyed your presentations and the content, and I also enjoyed the discussions that we had in this panel. And also I would like to thank you for the audience for your participation, and I hope you enjoy our discussion and presentation. Also, I wish you all enjoy the rest of the conference. So it's quite late here in Washington, D.C., and I think I will stay quite late. I'll stay up quite late until tomorrow morning. So I'll see how it goes. All right. I wish you a pleasant evening, pleasant morning. And that's the end of our panel. Thank you all and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the OC24 podcast. For more talks, have a look at the podcast feed on whichever platform you use. There are loads more to listen to. Video versions of these talks are also available on the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime YouTube channel. If you would like to share these talks around, we ask that you use the hashtag OC24 and let us know what you think. The 24-hour conference on global organised crime is brought to you by the European Consortium of Political Research Standing Group on Organised Crime, the Centre for Information and Research on Organised Crime, the International Association for the Study of Organised Crime, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. For more information, head over to oc24.globalinitiative.net. This has been the OC24 podcast from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Thanks for listening.